In this video, I will discuss the US building the world's first billion-dollar prison while homelessness and hunger run rampant in the American society. Also, the racial disparities and the business of prison. Let's go.
No one can do it better.
The US has the most incarcerated people of any nation on Earth, both by sheer numbers and per capita. As of June 2020, there were 2,121,000 prisoners currently serving time in the US, and a total of over 10 million in the prison system. The US incarcerates roughly 655 people per 100,000. No other OECD nation comes close. The UK sits at 140, Canada 107, France 105, Germany 77. China barely cracks 150. All the countries the US likes to cast as authoritarian hellholes, every single one of them incarcerates fewer people and often in far more humane facilities. The US represents 4% of the total world population, but 22% of the world's prison population. Everything is driven by the insatiable urge to accumulate greater and greater sums of money. The stock market demands perpetual growth. Corporations must make more this year than they did last year. The prison industrial complex is no different. We tend to think of prisons as self-contained entities. This is not the case. Companies have always been eager to work with prisons to increase their profits. The companies that provide food to prisoners are only too happy to sell nutritionally deficient slop to the prison industrial complex. It's cheap to produce and nets them a healthy profit. The phone companies that provide basic call functionality to prisoners charge exorbitant pay-per-minute rates because they know how desperate these poor people are to speak to their loved ones. Transportation companies make a killing shuttling prisoners to and from court appearances and between prisons. But more egregious than these examples is the practice of modern-day slavery. You've probably heard that the state of California routinely puts inmates to work fighting fires. Do you know what they're paid for putting their lives on the line? $2 per day, or $2 per hour when they're actively fighting fires. Incarcerated people have their own minimum wage. Care to guess what it is? It's not $2, it's 12 cents per hour. Some states, including my home state of Texas, do not require incarcerated workers to be paid at all. Would you sell an hour of your life for 12 cents? Of course you wouldn't. But the people trapped in the prison system have no choice in the matter. They are required to do the work that is demanded of them. This is slavery. In normal years, they provide forced labor for thousands of US corporations, including big names like McDonald's, Wendy's, Tyson, Verizon, Sprint, Fidelity, Walmart, JCPenney, and IBM. Let's talk about private prisons. As the war on drugs ramped up in the 1980s, federal prisons began to become overcrowded. The solution? Turn to the private sector to build new prisons for all this excess human inventory. The government contracts a private company to build the prisons, that company locks up the overflow prisoners, and in exchange they receive a fixed rate for each inmate. They are paid for each person they imprison. See the problem here? Think about it. Who profits from the existence of private prisons? Private companies are given multi-hundred-million-dollar contracts, then their executives turn around and donate huge sums of that same money to politicians who will support private prisons. It's a never-ending cycle. Corrupt politicians are making money, private prisons are making money, and thousands of US companies are making money from literal slave labor. CoreCivic, formerly Corrections Corporation of America, is the largest private prison manager in the country. In 2019, they raked in $1.98 billion in revenue, all on the backs of exploited human beings, stuffed into their prisons with a price tag on each one. What's even more ridiculous is that the vast majority of the private prison contracts contain a lockup quota. That is, a guaranteed percentage of occupancy for the duration of the agreement. Most of these quotas are set at 90% occupancy, with some even landing an insane 100%. So, in a time when crime rates are the lowest they've been in decades, these private prisons are guaranteed to have their cells filled. If those cells aren't filled, they're still paid as if they were. And guess who pays the bill? US taxpayers. There was one hideous incident in 2008 which became known as the Kids for Cash scandal. 2 judges in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania were found to have been accepting bribes from for-profit correctional facilities to dole out ridiculously harsh sentences for minors. Thousands of children were slapped with extended stays in these private facilities. So, to recap, the US started the war on drugs which US groups like the CIA were shuttling into the country, began locking people up at unprecedented rates for nonviolent drug offenses, realized we had literally run out of all of our prison space, and decided to contract out private companies in order to lock up more people, and then paid those companies to incarcerate even more people. And US prisons are certainly punishment. In fact, they're so inhumane that the United Nations has condemned them as abusive and torturous. And human rights organizations have long asserted that one of the prison industrial complex's favorite tools, solitary confinement, is literal torture. Once someone has been released from prison, it's much harder to find a job. And 2 out of 3 end up right back in a cell because their situation is so desperate. We've effectively criminalized poverty. Can't pay a parking ticket? Jail. Can't pay bail? Prison term. No one will hire you when you get out? Serves you right for being a criminal. This mindset is truly horrific. We cannot ignore the fact that systemic racism plays a large role in the American prison system. 2 men, 1 white and 1 black, charged for the same crime with the same criminal background, are often given different length prison sentences. Can you guess who gets the longer sentence? On average, black people are given 20% longer sentences for the same crime committed by a white person.
Here is the key information about these billion-dollar prisons. Billion-dollar supersized prisons are slated to be built across the U.S. Alabama is building a new supersized prison that will cost over $1 billion, the most expensive incarceration facility in the U.S. history. The Alabama Corrections Institution Finance Authority approved a final price of $1.08 billion for the 4,000-bed prison now under construction in Elmore County. And Alabama isn't the only state moving forward with plans for larger, pricier prisons, with proponents of such facilities citing the needs to address the issues of overcrowding, poor sanitation conditions, and a lack of mental health resources in the current facilities. Sounds like an excuse to me. Nebraska is building a new $350 million 1,500-bed prison to replace the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Supporters say it will alleviate the overflow of inmates in the state's prison, which hold about 50% more people than they were designed for. This investment is a key part of our community. Yeah, we know that. This is how these little cities keep running off the backs of people that are incarcerated. In Georgia, officials have been tasked by the Fulton County Board of Commissioners to find the funds for a $1.69 billion facility with 4,500 beds to replace the current Fulton County Jail. Other advocates argue that the lack of meaningful rehabilitation in many prisons is a contributing factor to the overall problems in society. I agree with that. Other critics have balked at Alabama's lawmakers' willingness to spend $1 billion on a prison when 1 out of 4 children in the state, one of the poorest in the country, and 70% of the adults there struggle with food insecurity. Food insecurity, you guys, means that they're starving to death, that they're not getting enough food to eat. They come up with these words, these innocuous words to lighten the mental blow and to dull the reality of what's really happening on the street. Many in Alabama don't have access to food, running water, and health care. It is unconscionable that the state leaders would spend over $1 billion to construct the most expensive super prison in the nation. This should outrage everyone. Agreed. Some have also raised questions about who will pay for the prisoners in Alabama, Nebraska, and Georgia, with opponents objecting to make taxpayers fit the bill. We all know the taxpayers are the ones that are going to pay for the incarceration and the building of these prisons. There's also plans for additional prison construction projects, including the new jail to replace New York City's notorious Rikers Island. I've heard horrific stories about that place. The Alabama project has been cloaked in secrecy. Of course it is, because they do everything in the dark so you don't know what's going on. That's how they maintain their power. From the beginning, this project has been cloaked in secrecy. The state and the firms it has hired have denied public information requests that could reveal what exactly tax money is buying or who is getting paid. I just don't understand how this continues to happen. Well, I do understand, because the powers that be are in power and they're not going to relinquish that power. So here, they don't give the public the information, because information is power. So you don't know who's getting paid, you don't know who's making the money, and then you don't know exactly how much the taxpayers are having to pay for this. This is criminal. This is straight up criminal. They have refused to show so much as what this prison would look like. Meaningful change should focus on rehabilitation, cognitive behavioral therapy, education, and personal development will help incarcerated individuals lead successful lives in the community as family members, employees, and community leaders, instead of just building more and more billion-dollar prisons. I have been doing a series, you guys, on Colorado Buffalo's football head coach, Coach Prime, and it's called Inspiring a Nation. What I do is I take his motivational speeches for his team and I show them through Bible verses. I add Bible verses to it for inspiration. These are excellent. I wanted to just quickly show you some of these. Please go to my channel and subscribe. There is a playlist on these. There's about 13 of these. I absolutely think you guys will love these. Take a look at this short video, which speaks of the racial disparities and also the effects of incarceration.
Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically it was 100 per 100,000, now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9. The research shows that kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out. And there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.
Here's a couple verses to explain the situation of why we have this going on, starting with Baruch, chapter 4, verse 15. For he hath brought a nation upon them from far, them being the Israelites, a shameless nation, and of a strange language, who neither reverenced old men nor pitied child. So this is a shameless nation that does this, that builds billion-dollar prisons, while we've got people that are homeless and people that are starving. They would rather put $1 billion into a prison than help these people. If I was put in charge of $1 billion, I would do this. I would create sustainable farms powered by solar power, and I would build livable cities with small structures to house the homeless. $1 billion is $100 million times 10. You guys don't even realize how much money that is. That is just a slew of money, and I would be able to put a major dent into homelessness and people starving to death instead of incarcerating people and building billion-dollar prisons. Next verse, Revelations 2:10. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, I will give thee a crown of life. So it clearly says here, some of us are going to be thrown into prison, but we got to be faithful unto death, and he's going to bless us with a crown of life. And the reason why we don't have to fear any of this is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So this is why we do not have to fear. All praises to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is Crown Prince Media. I am the Crown Prince. Let's go.
No one can do it better.